As developers, we're all pretty used to writing bash or ZSH to manage our terminal, to be able to define commands and functions and do things, but they're not the nicest languages to write. So what if we could write a terminal and make it behave by using a language we're more familiar with? Well, I've been hacking on this very briefly, and I just kind of want to show what I've got here. So introducing PHPShell. This, as I run it, is a command that could act as a shell, but as it's here, it will capture my input and I can do things and type things, but it will fall back to my underlying shell. So in this case, I have ZSH with ohmyZSH as my fallback, and as I type ls, it is going to return to me the results of whatever ZSH's ls is. And that works for all kind of interactive things as well. It's really, really handy. But where this gets really interesting is I can now come and define a custom PHPRC file in my home directory and do custom things there with PHP. Let me show you one of them. I'm going to come down and uncomment this prompt call that I've got here. And this is a custom function provided by PHPShell for the RC file. And I can chain things off of it. For example, what text I want to show there, what color that text should be, if it should show the current working directory at this point, and the order that you put these in matters. So I could come up here and change the color here to cyan, and then everything after this until the reset color, so in this case the current working directory, is going to be in cyan. And then this is going to be in the base color, and then everything after this is going to be in magenta, so on and so forth. So where I add text or do things like this, it is going to matter and make a difference. So now that I've uncommented this, let's just understand what we should be seeing here. The prompt should be on a new line. The current working directory should be showed in cyan. There should then be a space, and it should show the git branch if we're in a directory that has a git folder. And then the input should be on a new line with this chevron and a space after the chevron for us to type our input in. So I'm going to come back and I am going to rerun PHPShell, and you kind of see that's what it is. I now have a new line before anything happens, the current working directory, and the git branch. And I can come in here, I can type stuff and see commands still work exactly as expected. Just to give another example, I can touch a file and then ls and it's showing up there. And this is to show it's not a faux pas, it's actually working and the commands are being sent to the appropriate thing under the hood. But the prompt that we've got there is entirely controlled by PHP, which is pretty cool. But that alone isn't super useful, so let's see what else we can do. If I uncomment this, you can see I've got this shell command attribute which I have defined, and I've got a couple of functions here. These are just regular PHP functions, foo, bar, and baz. And each of those have this shell command attribute assigned to it. So if I come in, and I will restart PHPShell in order to make sure it's taken in all the changes, I can now go and run foo. And I'm going to see that it works and says foo, and I can do the same for bar and baz. And it is showing the exact output of these functions here defined in PHP. And all I had to do here was use the PHP syntax I'm familiar with, echo, PHP, EOL, everything like that. The only thing I had to do was apply this shell command attribute to a function to make sure that when I type in this value, the function gets invoked. Let's have a look at another more solid example where it becomes a little bit more useful. In this case, I've got a shell command called example, but that is actually a class. But inside there, I have a method of that with another shell command of example method. And this kind of lets you add subcommands to a command. So again, I come back, and actually I don't think I need to reload it. I think it should just work. If I type example, example-method, I can try and run that command, and it's going to say missing required argument param1. Well, of course, because this function has a required parameter of param1. So, okay, let me go and run that again, and I'll pass in Liam. And then you can see it's taken param1 as Liam and param2 as 42. If I pass in another one, let's say 67, it's going to take that in as param2. And we don't need to figure out whatever the bash syntax is for that. It just works naturally with however PHP is expecting it to work. And what's really nice about this as well is that maybe we didn't know there was a param2, but we knew there was a optional parameter called param2. So we can come in here and run something by passing through a parameter using a Unix syntax that we're familiar with. And it will kind of automatically map to the parameter name in the function that we're calling, which I think is really, really nice. Let's have a look at another example. So I've got this greet function here. So let me just come and run greet, and we'll see, good evening, Liam.Hammett. Well, Liam.Hammett is my current user, so I can run who am I, and it will show Liam.Hammett. So how is this working? Well, it is using the getCurrentUser function, unless I pass in a name. So I could come here and I could run greet --name equals Taylor, for example. It's going to say, good evening, Taylor. And then what is the greeting made up of? Well, the greeting is actually going to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on the time of day. But I could change that to say hello. Really basic stuff. So let's see another example. Here I've got one that's slightly more complicated. I have a getURL function. This is just a utility function. It is not a command at all. So we are going to scroll down and skip over all of this. But where we do see a command is this getHeaders command. So remember, whatever it is in the shell command attribute is how we can invoke this. The actual name of the function itself is kind of irrelevant. So I can call getHeaders. I can pass through a URL, and it is going to go through this getURL function, extract the headers for it, and then give me a var dumped output of it, which may or may not be useful in certain ways. So let's give that a shot. It is getHeaders, and then let me take liamhammett.com, for example. And I've come and it's given me all of the headers for liamhammett.com that are being returned by that, but in a PHP var dump way. So it's a really dumb example, but you can start to see how as you pull in your own dependencies and as you pull in your own things, it becomes really powerful, and you can use the syntax and tools you're familiar with instead of having to defer to some esoteric syntax that you haven't touched in 15 years. So tell me what you think. Do you like this? Would you want something like this to be able to help speed up your own terminal development?